I think we just started recording.
All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. Just going to turn my video off, get my mug out of there. I was really happy to do this presentation when Mike and I got together and talked about it. I sat in on Tim Warner's Visual Studio Code presentation and just kind of dropped my name, and Mike asked if I'd be interested in doing something. So we finally got together, and as he said, we talked about, what are we looking for? And it just seems to be a common theme out there that, Azure is kind of a big topic. And a lot of people don't really have, they don't know where to start. And that's what I want to do here is I want to get you started in Azure, because I swear to God, 6 months ago when I took my position at Pluralsight, I was in the same boat. And I've played around with Azure a little bit as an instructor. I taught at a technical college for about 17 years. And I wanted to do more Azure, and I wasn't able to because we just didn't have the space in our classes. So I would demo Azure, I'd do a little Azure, but I didn't really get my teeth into it. So what I wanted to do is I had to learn on my own. I had to learn very quickly once I started at Pluralsight. I had a great opportunity. Don Jones said, "Hey, can you do some courses?" I said, "Maybe." Bing, bang, boom. I left the college and I'm working for Pluralsight. And he just said, "Learn Azure." And I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of a big chunk. And he kind of whittled it down to Azure Migration. So I'm the Azure Migration guy at Pluralsight. I got a couple of courses that's partnered with Microsoft that helps with the migration process. So I want to take what I learned to get myself up to speed in Azure and hopefully pass some of that along to you and kind of give you a couple of things that you can take right away and get started with. So we came up with Azure 101. I always say I'm kicking the tires in something, just trying it out. And one of the biggest common themes that I hear is that, well, I don't want to spend a lot in Azure. If I'm just trying to learn it, I don't want to go broke trying to learn it. So I hope to show you a couple different areas where you can save, your Azure spend, we call it. Of course, you're going to have some free Azure that I'll show you, but even going beyond your free Azure, I hope to show you some things that will be very useful where you can keep on using Azure and playing around with it. At least keep it on your radar and in front of you. So with that, we'll get started. Let me get my... So where I want to start out is, where do we start? And this is basically what I went through last May through August, basically trying to figure out how to get my sea legs under me. And then once I got there, once I got there, I was able to find some resources, and I packed those in my back pocket, and I rely on those every day. Next, I want to talk about, what do I get with my Azure free account? Now, with Pluralsight, I use my own account. I use my, my consulting account, I'll call it, and I just get reimbursed from Pluralsight. But during that time, I was able to leverage some of the free stuff with my account, and I want to show you some of the stuff that I didn't even know about up until about a month or two ago that, I wish I would have known that a year ago. And then what I want to do is I want to get into the Azure 101 stuff. There's several resources that, no matter where you're going in Azure, I want to make sure that you have a decent understanding, at least a high-level understanding of what those resources are when people are talking about those. So we're going to look at the Azure assets. We'll look at cost-saving tips along the way. And then we'll dive into the Azure Portal, kind of explore through some of that information. And then, of course, this is the PowerShell users group. I want to dive into some PowerShell. And then towards the end, I'll be diving back and forth between PowerPoint and my demonstrations. I have, I think, 20-some PowerPoint, 25 slides in my slide deck, which is a lot for me. So I don't like to be heavy on slides, but with a 101 topic, I want to have some good information up on the screen. With that being said, I have a markdown file as well as my script that I'll figure out with Mike how we can get that out to you. Either I'll put it on my gist up in GitHub, or I'll just share a repo on GitHub. So we'll get all that information out to you. So we're going to deploy a VM in Azure using the UI as well as PowerShell. I have one other cool thing that I'm going to do too, hopefully time permitting, and Azure Gods and Demo Gods permitting, is I want to be able to show you an app service that we can roll out fairly quickly. So, and then finally we'll wrap up with some Q&A. And again, along the way, I hope you ask some questions. I don't have the chat window up in front of me, so Mike said if there's going to be a lot of questions, we can pull over to the side of the road and answer some of those questions. I'll do the best that I can to answer those questions. If I can't answer those, hopefully somebody in chat can, or what I'll do is I'll have, we'll actually document those questions and I can get those back to you. All right. So where do we start? That was basically me when I first started at Pluralsight. I was pulling my little bit of hair that I have left out of my head. And, you know, how do I do this without losing my mind again? And I know all of us that are in IT, we get thrown a topic that we don't have anything to go with, right? It's not maybe in our toolkit. So we have to figure out how we're going to get that going. And quite honestly, Azure is no different than any other topic, any other skill that we have to acquire. We just start the same way. Now, this is something I always felt was kind of interesting. I think it relates to IT extremely well. Just because you got the monkey off your back doesn't mean the circus has left town. And I think that is totally explains IT entirely. The other one I like is that I like to say that it's not my monkey, it's not my circus. I don't know if that's the right one to say, but it really is something. Once we get that monkey off our back or that IT project off our back, what do we have? We have another one that's coming down the stream. And if we have the right, I guess, tools in front of us, you know, how to get those resources, you know, hopefully that circus isn't going to be quite as intimidating. So where do I start? When I was teaching, I actually did some writing for Microsoft, and I developed some study guides for the Windows 7, Windows 8.1, Server 2008 R2, Microsoft Technology Associate tracks. And we had to document and cite our resources, and Microsoft was very particular about what sites I could cite. So I just said, all right, heck with it, I'm going to use TechNet. And pretty much everything I cited was TechNet. Well, TechNet has evolved into docs.microsoft.com or Microsoft Docs or Azure Docs or whatever you want to call them. This is my go-to. This page, this half of the screenshot that you see here, this is my start page on every device that I have. Every laptop or desktop that I open up, it has this here because I know this is going to be my launching point for anything that I'm going to be doing. So if we, and I'll go right out there, but this is docs.microsoft.com/Azure. Now, these bars up ahead, of course, I got to point out Pluralsight, shameless plug. We have a ton of free courses that we're partnered with Microsoft that we provide for Microsoft. They're Azure courses. My migration courses are out there. So you can go out there, and it's in front of the paywall with Pluralsight, and actually get little deeper dives. They're 1 to 2 to 3 hour courses that get more into the weeds on some of the specific topics that you might be interested in. And then as an IT ops person, I will dive into the architecture area. The architecture area brings up a bunch of good information. If you're looking at design or even certifications, it's going to be a plethora of information for you and stuff that you can get into. So as we see here, we have an application architecture guide, reference architectures, enterprise cloud adoption. It's going to show you all the different areas where you want to build resiliency into your environment or into your cloud environment. I mean, are you going to spread it across a couple different geolocations? Do you have LRS storage and whatnot? And then if you look on the left-hand side, it has the cloud fundamentals, example scenarios, design guides. I mean, this is just a wealth of information right at your fingertips. And again, it's all for free. Now, so let's take a peek out at the Azure Docs. Now, I have these demo slides in the slide deck just because it's a good reminder for myself to shut up and let's go and look at something for reals. So let me get my slide up here. So out here is docs.microsoft.com. Now, as you see here, this is everything that Microsoft has under their umbrella. They migrated all of the TechNet information over to the Docs area. And what's really cool about it is it's not fairly inclusive, it's all inclusive. So I can focus here on, let's see, Azure. And this is my home page. This is where I start with everything. Now, if I scroll down here, just kind of show you where I've spent most of my time. I'm going to go to Azure Migrate. And it'll give you step-by-step tutorials. And this isn't the best example because there's only a single step-by-step tutorial. And I'll click on this. But this has a great deal of information. Even the simple tutorial. You can go through, you look at the prereqs, create an account, and it walks you through the process of doing a real live assessment in your environment. Now, this isn't a tutorial that requires a ginormous amount of test lab, all right? I did this on a simple VMware ESXi running in VMware Workstation, and I was able to do all of my demonstrations in my courses just by going through some of this documentation, which I found was just extremely useful. So it does have overview. Now, what's cool about docs.microsoft.com is all this stuff is out on GitHub. And I know we've, actually, I see you have a talk coming up with Tom Rayner talking about Git, which is going to be awesome. I can't wait to see that. What's nice about this is that we can edit any of these documents. We can basically submit a pull request to Microsoft. And if it is a legitimate pull request, if it's something that looks right, they'll merge it into their document. And I don't want to brag here, but this guy here actually did a pull request, and it was last week. And I was so fired up about it. I pinged Tim Warner on Slack. I said, I got a pull request in. They merged my pull request. He was like, oh, that's cool, Mike. Nice work. So what's really cool is this, as Mike was saying, it's community run. It's community driven. And again, the docs are frequently updated. If you look at the date up here, 10th of January was the last time it was updated. TechNet wasn't like that at all. So again, this is a great resource to at least get that girth of information under your belt. Now we can look at the products. And if we look at all products, all products. This is everything that you'll see in the Azure space. And everything in here has documentation behind it. So if you look at Azure DevOps, we can look at Security Information Security Center. These are all big topics within Azure. Now that's one thing that I think is really awesome about Azure, whether you're new to the industry or you're a grizzled veteran like myself. I've been in the industry for more than 20 years. There's something for you in Azure, right? Whether you want to go down the dev path, platform as a service. I mean, they have everything. And I don't want to be selling Azure. This could be AWS. This could be GCP. All these cloud environments have pretty much everything that you want to learn or actually dive into if you want to make a change in your career. So I'll go back to the getting started. And then down here has some additional information, command line tools. We'll dive into Azure CLI. We'll look at Azure PowerShell. Over here, we've all heard about the DevOps initiative. Everything is going DevOps. Microsoft has changed their Visual Studio Team, is it Team Foundation Server or just Team Services? That is now Azure DevOps. My last course that I did for Pluralsight, I actually had to put a dev hat on, which didn't fit very well, but I did a dev course through the eyes of an IT administrator. So it was kind of interesting. I refactored an app into Azure with the database and actually did a CI/CD, which is, it's not as hard as it seems. So again, this is where I started. I started with this site and basically went from there. So in addition to that, there's a cool course or a cool website out there called edX.org. And I think they're affiliated with Microsoft. Somebody could tell me differently, I don't know. But this has pretty much everything that you want to learn about IT. And I just typed in Azure. And when I first started with this, of course, I was looking for Azure Migrate. And I found a great course out there that was Azure Migration. I went through the process, and this helped me with a lot of the vocabulary. Of course, that's kind of a big deal when you're looking at different technologies, actually understanding the language. It's like learning another language. That was a big challenge for the students that I had while I was an instructor. I had students coming out of high school and trying to teach them IT terms. I mean, it was a struggle. And then you had students that had English wasn't their first language. So now they're learning a third language and trying to draw the parallels. So this was a really good site that helped me get the Azure language down. Now what's cool about this too is it says length 6 weeks, but these are self-paced. So whatever amount of time you wish to invest is how quickly you're going to get it done. And as we see the price there, it says free. You can add $100 to get a verified certificate. I'm not quite sure what weight that holds, but again, it's up to you on how you want to do that. So I thought this was an excellent resource. Then, of course, and I have this on my desk, it's right next to me right now, my hand's on it, Learn Azure in a Month of Lunches. Now, I follow Ian Folds on Twitter. This book is awesome. And, he promotes it. It's a great read. The challenge that he had with this book, and it's a challenge that I totally agree with, is that it changes. And he had some people talking, basically tweeting at him that, well, it's not current. Well, of course it's not current. Azure changes so flipping fast, it's ridiculous. And that can be daunting for some people. And that's where I'm looking at what I wanted to talk to you folks about today was if you get some of these foundational topics under your hat, it's going to be a lot easier. I'm going through a refresh of the 3 courses. My last course I finished middle of December, and we're already going through refreshes, basically maintenance to update it. And the first course that I did was the Azure Migrate assessing workloads. And they're changing Migrate so much that they don't want me to do the maintenance on it for several weeks until they get all of those changes baked into Azure Migrate. So it is what it is. Now, if you don't want to pay for the book, Microsoft is offering this book. It is an opt-in. So essentially you have to provide your information, and then you can get this book as an ebook download, which I think if you're going to dive into Azure, you might as well do this. Like I said, Ian does a great job walking you through some of the big topics in Azure. All right, it's not all inclusive. I don't think they can make a book that's going to be all inclusive, but it's excellent start on this. Again, the Month of Lunches series, whether it's Don Jones stuff or I think Jason Helmick's got an IS, but all that stuff is really good stuff. I have AWS in a Month of Lunches, which I haven't looked at yet, but looking to dive into that hopefully at some point in time. And yes, another shameless plug. Pluralsight does have a lot of good Azure courses, again, in front of the paywall. And if you do have a Pluralsight subscription, again, it's a great resource. I want to say it's not a bad resource. I don't want to say this just because I work at Pluralsight, but as an instructor working for a 2-year college, we adopted Pluralsight as part of our content for our courses. I did it as a pilot for a couple of semesters, and I mean, the resource that our students had for this was just amazing. The feedback was just awesome. All right, so here's what I think a lot of us came here to see. What do I get with my free Azure account? So at first we get a $200 credit for 30 days when you sign up. Now this is $200 to spend how you will. Now the thing I want to warn you about and challenge you with is that be careful of the services that you want to spin up. And I hope to show you some of the ways that you can identify which services and what pricing tiers they're going to be. So you got to be careful with this, because if you go on, you start up a SQL managed instance, you could blow that $200 out of the water within the first week. There's also Azure Pass. Now I signed up for Azure Pass on a couple different accounts over the last couple of years, and I think that's another 30-day trial as well. If you have an MSDN subscription, you'll get some Azure time in there. DreamSpark, which was the academic side of Microsoft, which I think now is called the Imagine Academy. They also have some Azure time in there. Now, I think when I saw that when I worked at the college, which was just over a year ago, you had Azure Access, but it was more geared towards the dev services. You didn't have a lot of infrastructure services. I don't know if that has changed since then, but again, it's something that you might want to check into. Then BizSpark is, again, that's an older term for the Microsoft Startups Initiative. So if you look at some of those different things, or your company does have that stuff, you might already have some Azure time that you can use. But again, use that $200 credit for the first 30 days. That's pretty cool. So what happens after that 30 days? So after that 30 days, you get 12 months of the more popular Azure services. All right. So for this group, that may include virtual machines, databases, storage, etc. What we'll do is, after I get done with this slide, we'll dive out into that area and look at all the different services. Now, this is 12 months of services, and this is something that I wasn't aware of when I was first playing around with Azure when I was in education. Would have been nice to know that. So you get 12 months of services, and you'll get like 750 hours for virtual machine time per month. And I'll show you how you can actually leverage that and how you can control that, so you can have several VMs up and running and not eating into that 750 hours. And then you're always going to have more than 25 free services, such as Active Directory, Azure DevOps, some automation, functions, virtual networks, etc. So these are things that you can play in Azure, basically create in Azure and not have to worry about getting dinged on your credit card for that. And that's kind of nice, because then you don't have to have that, mindset. And I know, when I was first looking at Azure, I was worried about creating anything. I'm like, if I create this, how much is this freaking going to cost me? So again, this is a nice kind of that keeps your mind at ease, that I can create this stuff, dive into it, look into it a little bit, and it's not going to cost us a ton of money. Other areas where you can get some Azure credit too. I know that if you're a not-for-profit, I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe the not-for-profits do have the ability to get Azure credit. And we were looking at spinning up a PowerShell users group up in Northeast Wisconsin. That's where I'm from, Green Bay. It's cold here. And I do believe we were looking at seeing if we can get that Azure credit for the not-for-profit. Also, if you're an Azure or if you're a Microsoft MVP, you do get Azure credits. So if any of you are MVP, I don't know how much you get for Azure, but I think it's something very worthwhile. I know Tim Warner's an MVP, and he does all of his Pluralsight stuff with his MVP credits.
Hey, Mike.
Yo.
Just a quickie. I did a little informal poll in the chat while you were doing your thing, and obviously not everybody answered, but the predominance of people here seem to have, there are some people that have some deep knowledge of Azure, but
cool.
As you would expect, there's a lot of people that said, I've never touched it, or I played with it and I was confused, or I'm just overwhelmed. So you're right on the mark with what you're doing.
Sweet.
And I just wanted to make a comment. There's a few people that were curious about, like, how do you keep up with it all? And I don't think you do. I don't even think you try to. I think you learn something that you're responsible for your day-to-day job, and then you learn as you go when you need other services.
Oh, absolutely, Mike. I couldn't agree with you more. And the thing that I like to, how I phrase it, is you take Azure in bites. You can't do all of Azure. And like I said, I'm the Azure migration guy. So I have a pretty good feel of what it takes to migrate workloads into Azure. I do not know everything about Azure. No one's ever going to do that. So yeah, no, and that was the thing that intimidated me a lot. I don't know if I can pull up my OneNote. I think I have it here somewhere, but I had so many links in OneNote, I didn't even know where to start. And when I was told, hey, you got to learn Azure, I was like, oh, what the heck? And here's my OneNote. And I have all these different links, and this is just on one of my OneNotes. I have another OneNote somewhere else on my another laptop, but these are all the different, again, this is building a desk. That's not really Azure-ish, but all the different stuff. I mean, it is overwhelming. You have to be okay with the fact that you're not going to know everything. And to be honest, that's IT in general. I mean, you're not. I would tell my students, I mean, you're not going to be an expert in this. Windows itself is billions of lines of code. I don't expect to be an expert on everything. So, and that's one thing that I think, especially in the cloud, you'll see this on the on-prem or the, IT in general. People went from being specialist and then to generalist. And now with cloud, we're going back to specialists. I mean, I don't know if anybody disagrees with that or if they see things differently. I know in this area of the country, we're kind of going back to, if you're in cloud, you're going to be specializing because, again, the cloud is just so big. And again, you look at AWS, GCP, Azure. I mean, it's pretty intimidating. Any other questions?
So there's a decent amount of chat going on, people basically commenting on the breadth of it all, but I do want to just let people know, keep those questions coming. We'll find a chance to get them in, or if there's not somebody on chat that has some experience to help you with that. What we would love is to queue up 3 or 4 so we can hit Mike with some questions and kind of not keep them off on rabbit holes all the time. So we don't have any right now, Mike, so feel free to go, but if you have some questions you want to ask Mike, get them into the chat, and one of us will make sure we get it over to Mike at some point.
Sweet. So after we get done with our 25 plus free services, then where do we go? All right, so we have those 25 always free services. And once we're done with our 12 months and we're looking at our business, well, you have to use Azure Service Calculator. All right, if you go to Azure's website, it's going to give you really good estimations of what it's going to cost to spin up VMs, databases, whatnot. That's where I spent a lot of my time in my first course was Azure Migrations. There's a service out there called Azure Migrate, which is a free service which gives you the ability to download an appliance into your VMware environment, and it essentially audits your environment, and it tells you what it's going to cost, from an operational expenditure to run any of those VMs in the cloud. And again, you don't have to run everything. I think that's some of the misconceptions with Azure. And some things may not be right for Azure. I mean, I'm not here to sell Azure. I'm a Pluralsight author, right? So I do courses. I'm in Azure. But again, not every company and not every workload is going to be right for Azure. So it's up to putting the pencil to paper and figuring out, is the operational expense going to be a cost savings versus the capital expenditure? Right. And when I say capital expenditure, I'm talking about the money you have invested in your data center. and having those server refreshes. I got server refreshes coming this summer, which I do not want to do. And it's really challenging me to say, is there something that I can do in the cloud that will help this customer not have to go through that capital expenditure every 3 to 5 years? So again, Azure has a lot of tools and resources that's going to get you close to where you're going to be and be able to make that decision whether you can get there or not. All right, so here, let's look at some of the free stuff. So I'll jump back out to Azure. So right here, we have create your free account. So if you go to azure.com, if you go azure.com/free, it automatically redirects you to this website. So if I look at this, I just saw a question. What is the tool that runs in your VMware environment called? It's called the OVA Collector Appliance. That's the VMware. You download that from Microsoft. It's a Server 12 virtual machine that you spin up. It runs its tools, and then it does the audit. And you have to have the statistical levels cranked up, not cranked up, but turned up to at least level 3 on your VMware environment. I don't get easily distracted. All right, so what do I get? 12 months, you get the popular free services, you got your $200 credit, and then you have your always free stuff. It's free, it's me. So here's our products that are 12 months free. Now it says these popular products are free each month for 12 months. So you're getting 750 hours a month, right? So you get Linux virtual machines, Windows virtual machines, managed disks, blob storage, SQL databases, and then bandwidth data transfer. What this is going to involve is data coming in and out of your environment. So if you're kicking the tires on Azure Backup, this would be that type of that cost. And then which products are always free? Some of the stuff may not be applicable for us. I see Kubernetes is out there. I believe Mr. Nocentino is an expert, Anthony Nocentino, if you've checked him out. And let's go to the full list. Active Directory B2C, Security Center, Azure DevOps is pretty cool. 5 users, unlimited private Git repos. Now again, this is in parallel with GitHub. This is not GitHub. This is Visual Studio Team Services that they use. Now, when you set this up, if you're using Visual Studio and you want to set up source control, you can choose either Azure DevOps or you can choose GitHub. Where that's going to end up at the end of the day, I have no clue. Some other things down here, automation, virtual networking, and then again, the bandwidth data transfer. You have up to 5 gig. So again, here's a resource that you can dive out and check and see where you have your, what you have access to. So the biggest thing here that I look at is the popular products that are free for 12 months. So like I said, when you look at 750 hours, that's about 1 month of a VM running constantly. So, if I want to run several VMs or build up a lab, I can set that up and make sure that I set my configure my VMs to make sure that they're turned off and I'm not killing or eating into my 750 hours. So now there is an actual cool service in the Azure Portal. So if I go into the Azure Portal, I'm logged in as myself. And what I do, and this is everything Microsoft is search, right? When I was writing for Microsoft, they didn't want you to go exploring through all programs, etc. They wanted you to type into the box, search programs and files, just like we do now with Windows 10. They do the same thing with everything. So search resources, services, and docs. I'm going to type free. And if I scroll down, here's my free services. I saw somebody pinged about the free. It's both Linux and Windows. So basically it's 1,500 hours for both. So here's free services. So what's cool about this is this keeps you from building a VM on your own, thinking it's free, and then you look at your credit card at the end of the month and you're getting dinged with Azure costs. So these are templates that's going to keep you within the Azure free space. It wasn't 1,500 each. It's 750 for Windows, 750 for Linux. They don't split the two, so I think that's the way it goes. So let's look at this one right here. Windows Virtual Machine Compute, 750 hours. I'll walk you through this. Now I have a pay-as-you-go subscription. Now the thing that it wants here is it wants an empty resource group, and we're going to talk about resource groups, and we'll circle back to this after we get through when we get through the resource groups after these are created. So I'm going to create a new resource group. We'll just call it demo.rg. I love resource groups. Think of resource groups as organizational units for Azure with all your resources. Now, I saw somebody posted this portal looks weird. This is the old dashboard. I don't have the home portal set up, and this may be dark theme. Virtual machine name, I'm going to call it Demo 1. I'm going to leave it at Central US because that's where I hang out. And then here it defaults to Server 2016 Data Center Server Core. Now, that's not because we're running on a smaller VM. If you've ever done an on-prem installation of Server 2016, the default installation product is Core. So I'm going to leave it at Core. But again, I have the options. It goes all the way back to Server 2008 R2 SP1. We'll leave it at Core. And then I'm going to put in a username. I don't like long usernames, and a very complex password. They do, actually, I typed it wrong. It's got to be at least 12 characters, but no more than 72, just in case. That's my complex password. All right. Now here, the inbound port rules. Now if you guys, is that too, can you guys see that okay? Is that better? So here, essentially, we're modifying the network security group. Think of the network security group as a Windows firewall. Excuse me? All right.
Just one more bigger, is it possible?
Oh, cool. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, shout out if you can't see it. How's that?
Thank you.
All right, dope. So I'm going to allow selected ports. Now, if you don't do this, you can go back and modify it. So just don't worry about this, because sometimes we get so caught up in what's on the screen, we kind of miss some of the parts, and we just click next. Right? Don't be the click next admin. What I always told my students is, look what's on the screen. Take in the entire environment. It's pretty awesome. That's how you're going to learn things. I learned, I mean, Microsoft growing up, everything was right mouse click on anything and see what I can break. All right, select one or more ports. I'm going to grab 80 and RDP. Now it says they're exposed to the internet, use advanced controls to limit inbound traffic to known IP address. So essentially we're poking a hole through Azure security. Everything by default is going to be shut down in Azure, which is the way it should be, right? So it's going to warn us again once we see that VM that, hey, unless you're in a test environment, these are no bueno. So we'll just leave it as is though. So we'll do review and create. I'm skipping the tags because that's not really applicable. That's kind of a higher level thing. Essentially, you can tag your resources so you can search them or group them better. All right. All right, so here's a summary of what we have. So I'm going to click Create. Now, again, this isn't a very heavy workload. This is 1 CPU and 1 gig of RAM. Ben says always be tagging. I started doing that when I was doing my migrate stuff. So it's going to submit the deployment. Now, I'm not going to hang here because, again, I don't like watching paint dry. But I do want to show you, it does give us status here. Once it gets to the point where we're looking, when it's starting to create the objects, we'll see some of the results here. I can also click on the notification bell, and it's going to tell me what's going on here as well. So again, we have, I'm going to close out of this. And here we do have some resources already being deployed. We have our network security group. We have our VNet, and then we have our IP address. We have a public and a private IP address that is going to be created. And then the last but not least, what's spinning up right now is the actual virtual machine. And that's going to take some time. All right, so I'm going to go back to the free services. And again, you can play around with any of these. And if you're going to play in Azure and utilize your 12 months free, do it within the portal, because that's going to guarantee, within reason, that you're going to be using the free service. All right. Don't try to create it on your own, because there's other additional configurations that need to be set properly so you're not burning up your Azure credit. All right. So that is the free stuff. So again, go out to azure.com/free, and then if you're going to create something, go to the Azure portal, search for free services. All right, so that's basically where to start, What do we get for free? How can we keep our costs down? Now, again, I'm still going to circle back and hit some of the topics on how to keep your costs down as we go through some of the creation stuff. Can you deploy multiple templates of the free stuff? Yes. The only issue is that it's going to create a separate resource group that's one of the things that I found. If I wanted to create another Windows workload, it's going to want me to create another, resource group. All right. So the 6 tools that I think are important just to get started with Azure, or at least have an understanding are resource groups, storage, virtual networks, network security groups, of course, Azure VMs, and we can't have a discussion in a PowerShell users group without talking about PowerShell. Now, some of these are very light topics. Some of these can be multiple sessions all by themselves. I'm looking at you, virtual networks. So I'm just going to give you some of the basics on these. We're going to do a high-level view of some of these, and if you want to dive deeper into those, there's a great deal of resources that we've already discussed, whether it's Pluralsight, whether it's edX, whether it's Microsoft Learn, etc. All right. Let's look at resource groups. Now, resource groups are essentially groups of resources. All right. So if you have a workload, or if you have an app, or whatever application you're going to be doing, it's nice to have all those resources in the same group. It makes it easier to manage. Like I said, think of Active Directory and think of organizational units. We want to put like objects in those containers. Think of this similarly to that. Now, the resources that you have within the resource group don't necessarily have to reside in the same region as the resource group. RG is going to be short for resource group from here on out. Now, if I create an Azure VM, a Windows VM out on West US region, right, I'll probably have to create the VNet out there as well, okay? But my resource group can reside in Central US, right? The metadata for those resources out on the West Coast is going to be stored in Central US. Okay. Now, there's going to be some resources that may be limited to other regions as well. So you may not even have a choice. You might want to say, well, I want this in the Central US. Well, at that time of the recording or that time of deployment, you may not have that ability. Doesn't necessarily mean you can't deploy it. It just means it's not available in that particular region. Azure Migrate was, that was one of the things that I found in Azure Migrate. They had limited regions where you can create your Azure Migrate project. Now I think it's Europe and US entirely, and that was part of my pull request. But that didn't mean that you couldn't migrate your machines to another region, right? So your Central US, you could migrate anywhere you want as long as it was supported, but just the Azure Migrate project metadata had to be stored in a particular region. Now, you have resources within resource groups. They can interact with other resource groups within your tenancy. All right. So again, that kind of makes sense.
Hey, Mike, a quick interruption.
You.
David Figueroa was curious about cross-region traffic in the circumstance you were just talking about. How does that count against your bandwidth?
That's a great question that I don't have a great answer to, David. Trying to think of what the free. Are you talking about like on-prem to the cloud or between regions? Is that you said between regions, right?
I think he means between regions. Yeah.
Okay. My gut says it's not tracked. I think the bandwidth is more so between on-prem and Azure. I could be terribly wrong, but my gut tells me what I've seen. There's somewhere I've seen that somewhere. But if you want, I can, Mike, if you can jot that question down, I can get a really good answer for David after.
Got it. And then when you get to it, way back in the chat earlier, Jeremy had asked if you get to Azure Automation and Azure Functions, if you had sort of a rule of thumb for when to use each and which is more successful for like cloud triggers and automation. So to keep that in your pocket when you get that deep.
Yeah, that might be another one we have to write down.
Okay.
But I know more about Azure Automation, which is not to say a lot, than I do Azure Functions. I know Tim Warner, if you look at the PowerShell conference book, you guys familiar with that one?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Tim has a great automation task in there. Basically, it really ties in with what we're doing here. I was looking to do that for this presentation, but it got to be too much. But if you go to the PowerShell conference, PowerShell Summit conference book, Tim has a great chapter in that has a good automation to basically actually shut down your VMs and not, cost you an arm and a leg, right? Awesome question, so thank you. I wish I could be more explanatory on some of those things. Any other questions?
I will just add that one of the leaders of our group, Lars, has been digging up lots of great resources on the internet to share with people, and he's been posting them in the PowerShell Raleigh Slack. So that's a good plug for us to say, come and join us over there. Lots of links to sort of expand on the things that Mike has been saying tonight. Sweet,
awesome. And like I said, I have resources I have a markdown file that I'll share with Mike, and we'll figure out where we can drop that. Coolio? All right. Now, one of the coolest things with resources groups, and again, this is one of those things that I wish I would have known this when I first started doing Azure stuff, is deleting the resource group deletes all the resources within the resource group. Now, you may say, well, why is that so cool? Well, because when you go through the UI and delete each one individually and wait for the function or wait for it to process and run the deployment of the deletion, it takes some time. And again, it's one of those, God, I wish I would have known this. But again, you're basically drinking from a fire hose when you're trying to get up and running on this stuff. So hopefully some of these resources and some of these gotchas that I went through, I like to call them learning opportunities. I hope they, hopefully save you some headaches like they caused mine. All right. Next, we're going to look at storage. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of this stuff. First and foremost, everything that you dump on Azure is secure. All storage is encrypted. Now, if you look at Azure and the other cloud providers, I believe they are compliant with most of the big compliant rules, whether it's Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, FERPA, etc. All right. Now, storage won't be storage if it wasn't scalable, meaning I can upscale and downscale. That is the thing, that is the beauty of Azure. And we're going to see that with the virtual machines, is that if I'm not using my compute, scale it down. And you can automate that. Those are the different instances when we talk about automation, is automating our scaling, making sure that we're not running at full, running full core processors when we're not at a busy time, even if we need to shut down our systems or spin up systems to support busy time. Now, a couple different ways that we can create and manage our resource account, or create and manage our storage accounts. Azure CLI is one, the portal obviously, and then PowerShell CLI. So those are a couple different ways that we can create our own storage accounts. Or when you use the Cloud Shell, it creates an account for you. Now, how many people? I can't see anybody, but Cloud Shell is a pretty cool thing, and I'll talk about the last slide with PowerShell and Azure CLI. But essentially, when you go into the Cloud Shell within the portal, it starts a shell session, and during that process, it creates a storage account for you. And that storage account is essentially like a profile, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. So essentially, it creates that free account. And again, this is non-persistent storage. Now, I was talking to Tim Warner about this for this type of discussion. And this is virtual networking, all right? Azure's VNets. He said that can be a rabbit hole that you may not come back from. And there's a lot of complexities that go into this. So again, for a 101 type discussion, I'm going to talk about basic stuff on this. It's essentially our private IP. It's essentially our private IP address and our public IP address. This is where we bind that stuff. Now, we can create or specify a private IP address space, or you can allow Azure to do that for you. So once you create that, Azure will by default assign a private IP address. Again, you can do that on your own as well, as long as it resides within that IP address space. Now, with any other type of virtual networking, you can create virtual nets and subnets. There's route tables and all that fun stuff that you can set up within there. You can also set up a VPN gateway. I know I had to do that for one of my courses where we were using database migration services, which requires an Azure VPN gateway. that was another price point that I did not realize that I could turn down to save a little bit of money. But again, the virtual networking is a huge topic when it comes to Azure. Now, one of the most important things, especially when we're talking about Microsoft, is name resolution. Azure will provide name resolution for you, or if you're daring, you can roll your own. Now, always remember, it's always DNS. I don't know how many tweets I've seen over the last couple of months about DNS, and I know I tweeted one out there about DNS, and it was actually DNS for me too on when I was doing one of my courses, and I had it's just a DNS issue. I don't know why that is so prevalent. Then network security groups. These allow you to filter traffic by creating security rules. This is your Windows firewall, essentially. Again, it's a little bit more than the Windows firewall, but as we'll see once we get into our virtual machine, it's very easy to configure. All right. Now, you can make it a little more advanced and make the complexity, it might be a little more complex, but it also may save you a little bit more time by creating service tags. I know, was that Dan Curran or something about tags? This is, again, another area where tags come into play. So identity or identify service tags, which represents a group of IP addresses or prefixes to minimize security rule creation. I don't like to have a one-to-one rule creation for an IP address. I would rather make sure I have a global rule, and then if I need to filter that down to a subnet, or again, if I have to do a single IP address, I will. Now, as I mentioned earlier, all outside Azure traffic is blocked. All right, that makes sense. I don't want to be Captain Obvious, but it would be, I couldn't even imagine, right? Now, if we want to have traffic to our internal virtual machines, we have to tell the virtual machine to allow RDP or whatever service we want to have through. All right, it's no different than your typical firewall. They will warn you, again, if you're listening on a well-known port, 3389, port 80, buyer beware. All right, just make sure that you understand what's going on with that. Also understand that it's up to you to secure it. All right, they secure it by default, but if you open things up, all right, that's not going to be a good day for you. I know I'm kind of going through these. We're going to circle back once we get into the demonstration. We'll look at some of this stuff in more detail, but I just wanted to get some of the core information out there, and at least you'll have this in the slide decks. All right, so virtual machines. Now, when we think of virtual machines, we're thinking, the standard, all right, I got to run it, I got to boot it up, I got to run through the install. There are actually preset images out there. All right, you have your default Windows images, you have your default Linux images. Then you also have a variety of different images with third-party products that you'll find out in the marketplace. And again, it's not just Windows and the standard Linux. I mean, you're going to see Debian out there. I believe Kali Linux is out there. And then, of course, you're going to see WordPress and quite a few different options that you'll see out in the marketplace. I haven't had a lot of need to go and explore the different images that are in the marketplace, but there's a cool, I think I have the, I don't know if I have that in my script, where we can actually go out and see the different types of images. Anyway, the default Windows VM is at Server 2016. Now, as we saw, it was core in the UI if done through the portal. All right, again, you can select other options. In PowerShell, you'll have the desktop by default if you do not specify the version. All right, so you'll have Windows Server 2016 with the desktop experience installed. Now, in PowerShell, again, if you don't, and I'm going to demonstrate this, if you don't specify the pricing tier or the size, it will default to a higher tier level as well. So if you're going to play around with PowerShell, if you look at and I have the example on my Markdown file, if you follow their example in Docs, it's going to put you at that higher level. Just be aware of that. You can go through and do that and then spin it down, turn it down, and deallocate it. But just remember, by doing some of their default stuff in the Azure Docs, it's actually going to hit your Azure spend. It's going to hit your Azure account. All right. And here we go as the reminder, those free templates prevents you from mistakenly choosing the non-free compute and disk options. All right, so always search for the free services in the portal while you can, while you're learning PowerShell. Right? Nate says free. Absolutely. If it's free, it's me. Right on. All right. So here's here's a screenshot from the VMs that I had up and running, just so you understand the differences between having a VM in Azure and having a VM in Azure that is stopped, and then having a VM in Azure that is stopped and deallocated. All right. The first two options are chargeable minutes. All right. Azure charges on a minute-by-minute basis. So if your Azure machine is up and running, of course, it's going to be eating into your 750 free time. All right. If you shut it down within the VM, meaning if you go into the OS, say you're in PowerShell, how do we stop a computer in PowerShell? Stop-computer, right? That's going to put it into a stopped status. If you click on the window button and click shut down, that is a stopped status. Okay. If you go in to the portal, and as we see right here, and click stop, that is going to put it in a stopped deallocated status. So what does that mean? That means that it releases the reservations, meaning your resources that you were using get released. This includes your public and private IP addressing assignment. So when you spin that demo 1 VM up again, it's going to get a new IP address. The private IP address, unless you have a bunch of different VMs in there, it'll probably stay the same. But your public one, no, it's going to be a lot different, okay? Because they're cycling through public and private public IP addresses probably every second, all right? Now, if I want to do this in Azure or do it in PowerShell, I'm going to use my AZ modules, and I'm going to do get-azvm space, and again, the dash resource group name. So this is if I was going to do this on that entire resource group of VMs. I type dash resource group name and then whatever my demo group or whatever my resource group is. And then I pipe that over to stop-azvm. Now here's the kick. You have to use dash force, Skywalker, right? You have to use the dash force. Otherwise, it does not go into the deallocated state. All right. So if you just do stop-azvm, it's no different than going into the VM and shutting it down itself. And it just sits there and you're still using runtime. Not necessarily runtime, but charge time. Okay. So that above command stops the VMs from the resource group. If I wanted to get all my AZVMs, I don't have to put in the resource group. Just type get-azvm and then pipeline that to stop-azvm-force. All right. And then finally, Azure Cloud Shell. Now, Azure Cloud Shell gives you the ability to run Bash, PowerShell, and they both leverage Azure CLI. I believe Azure CLI is based off Node.js, if I'm not mistaken, right? But Azure CLI is the AZ commands. I'm not going to get into the AZ commands. I'm going to stick primarily with PowerShell, okay? Now, Azure RM, the old Azure module, is being replaced by the new AZ module, right? So if you're using the Azure RM commandlets for your Azure stuff, and ironically, they still have a lot of that in their Azure Docs. If you look at the Azure Docs, it's all Azure RM commands or commandlets. So they're making that change slowly, but the adoption to the AZ module is something you need to get on board with. Now, if you want to kind of band-aid that for now, there's an enable-Azure RM alias, which will enable the Azure RM compatibility mode until you get all of your scripts refactored. Now, this is when you have the new AZ module installed. I think if you do the enable AZ RM alias, that will still run your scripts, unless somebody in the PowerShell world can tell me differently. I switched out my Azure RM, and I didn't go through the apps and features option, removing it through the GUI. I was trying to do it through Azure, through PowerShell, and it was kind of wonky, but I'm getting there. So the cool thing about Shell, and Michael Bender is a guy that would be a cool option to have to come in and talk about Cloud Shell for this resource group. And he's doing a presentation out at PowerShell Summit. Hopefully we'll see a lot of you folks out there. I'm going to be out there. It's going to be my 3rd year in a row. But he's going to be doing a presentation about Azure Shell or Cloud Shell. And what's really cool about that is it's basically device agnostic. Your shell anywhere, anytime, on any device. And I thought this was so awesome. So here's my Android phone. And I have the Azure app on my Android phone, and I can get right into the Azure Shell. And it's so freaking cool. I was at a restaurant with my wife, and I showed her this because I was paying attention to her, and I said, "Isn't this freaking cool?" And she was like, "Meh." But I said, "This is Azure," and I went, I did, I did get dash resources and all that stuff, and she wasn't that impressed. Neither was the waitress. But anyway, you got to nerd out every once in a while. I do want to point out that my battery life is sweet and strong. I don't know about you, but when I see people with red Twitter pictures of their phone and they're at like red or 1%, it just freaks me out. But that's a whole different conversation and issue. All right, how are we doing? This is basically the last demonstration, but this is where we're going to dive into Azure and check on the VMs and do some PowerShell VMs. Plow through?
We're doing well. There was someone who just asked, when you were talking about the two different Azure modules, Azure CLI and the Azure RM, do you know if any of them are more, is one more critical to know than the other for certain purposes?
Oh, that's
the thing. We seem to think it's probably the old one because they're probably not updated yet.
Yeah, I would err on the old one. I will ask Tim Warner about that because he is the certification master. I would guess that because he just refactored all of his Azure scripts to the AZ module. I know he tweeted about that, but he's doing certifications, and that'll be an easy question that he can respond to very quickly. And I'll see if he can post that on Twitter. But I would believe they're still using the Azure RM. The biggest reason why is that all their docs sites that I've seen so far are Azure RM. Is that cool?
Sure.
Coolio. Anything else? Sweet. Let's plow ahead. Whoops. Nope, not there. I don't want to thank you guys yet. All right. So we fired up a resource. I went to my notification bell, and my deployment was successful. Of course it was. So I'm going to go to that resource. This is demo 1. And it gives me my information. Here's my public IP address. And what they do is they give you a copy button. So I can copy that. Now I copy that. I can go to my remote desktop protocol and connect to it from there. I can connect to it from up here as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us the download for RDP or SSH if we have SSH enabled. So I can download the RDP file. I'm going to click open. And of course, it opens on the other screen. Click connect, and it connects on the other screen. So my user was MJ, my password was yes. Okay, where'd it go? All right, well, that's not playing nicely with me. Let's see, is it hiding somewhere? There it is. It was hiding behind WebEx. All right, so here is our core installation of Server 2016.
I think people are going to need a little help with the size on that if possible.
Okay.
Or guys, you can zoom in your WebEx session as well.
Yeah. I'm in default world, so how's that?
Better.
I have several comments, but I'll leave them to myself. All right, so again, this is a basic core installation. All right, exit to command line, get to PowerShell. when you run zip the first time, it's always a little pokey. There's my IP address. Again, my gateway, my DNS server. Don't touch DNS. All right. So that's pretty much proof of concept getting that VM up and running. Not very complex. All right. It worked pretty well, other than me losing it behind the WebEx. So let's take a peek at some of the details of that. So as I go through here, I'm going to close this up. Now here's where I was talking about. If I click stop here, this is where it'll put it into a deallocated state. All right. Now if I wanted to set up my own RDP, I can copy the IP address here. Now if I go down to networking, this is where I see my network security group. All right, so I can add an inbound rule. If I forgot to add 3389, or maybe I didn't do secure shell because maybe I turned on secure shell, this is where I can add that rule. We have our outbound rules, application security groups, and load balancing. Now it created a demo1-vnet. This is a virtual network. If I click on this, it's going to give us some more information. It created a default subnet for us. Okay, so we're using an address space of /24. If we look at that, this is where we can add additional ranges here if we want to. If I click on subnets, and it just gives us default subnet, I have 250 available addresses. So again, I can add more devices here, and everything should be good to go. Let's go back to... Now going back to demo 1, what I want to do is I'm going to scroll down. Again, there's a bunch of different options here. I don't want to get into any of this stuff because, again, it's beyond the scope of this conversation and my knowledge base. So this is the one thing that I wanted to show you guys. Auto shutdown. If I turn this on, and it's pretty easy to do, I'm going to put 10 p.m. Everybody knows my time zone, so I'll leave it at Central Standard Time. I can have it send me an email if I wanted to. So I can save this, and now if I forget about this, which happens a lot in my house, I don't have to worry about this chewing up my Azure time. All right, so this is going to shut down at 10 p.m. I also have backups ready to go. If I wanted to start a backup, I can certainly get that configured. I'm going to use demo RG, and then I can enable backup. I'm not going to enable backup right now because, again, in the portal, it is configuration time, and I don't want to chew up your configuration time, or chew up your time with configuration. All right, so this is our UI-free virtual machine within Windows. Okay. Now, what I want to do, does the auto shutdown look for user activity? No. Let's look at doing this via PowerShell. So here I created a, why is that doing that? I just basically copied this from Microsoft Docs and tweaked it a little bit for my own purposes. So this site right here, does auto shutdown equal deallocated, Jim? I'm going to say yes, otherwise it's not useful. But I was thinking about that when I'm like, why would they have auto shutdown if it didn't deallocate it? All right, so this is out at Azure Docs. And I selected, we're in Windows VMs, and we can do Create VM Portal. We already did that. We can use PowerShell or Azure CLI. So I went into the PowerShell. And what's cool about this is we can launch Azure Cloud Shell from here and play with some of these commands. So right here, create resource group. So we can create a resource group using PowerShell. So what I can do is I can click try it. Now, I think this is so awesome. I don't like to nerd out like this, but it's freaking awesome. All right. I'll choose my account, Azure Cloud Shell. So again, I could do this when I'm sitting in a restaurant with my wife, which is so welcoming. All right. It does take a little bit to start up. So we'll clear this out. And now I can type new-az resource group. Come on. RZ. Notice in the documentation it's Azure RM. there it is. Now I can verify this a couple different ways. I can type get dash Azure resource group. Son of a beat. I knew that was going to be wrong. Come on. Spelling's hard. I was actually pretty confident with my last resource group name. I misspell resource group all the frickin' time. All right, so there is my Teske resource group right here. Okay. So let's remove that. Group. This is why I should have this in a file. Tab complete is okay. It didn't do it before, so see, if I did the force, it wouldn't ask me. And yes, I say did the force because I always like to reference Star Wars if I use the force. So this, hopefully this doesn't take too long, but while that's thinking about what it's done, over on this side, now notice in this command, it gives us the basic information, resource group name, what I'm going to call my VM, where it's going to reside, my virtual network name, subnet, security group, public IP address, what ports I want to open, which I think is pretty cool. That's basically walking through the entire process through the UI. Now, the thing that's missing here is we're not identifying the OS, and we're not identifying our pricing tier, our size. So that's where it can get you in a little bit of trouble if you're trying to keep your costs down. So understand that you can add the different sizes to that new VM. Now I do have this up here. Well, I didn't do it. Yeah, the size does not do the, if you do the control spacebar for the PS reline, let's do location. Yeah, so location does the control spacebar so I can select it. I wish it did that for size. So you'd have to actually type in the size, and I think we're at a 2 BS1 or 1 BS2 or something like that. Yes, Jim, size does matter. All right, so get kind of an understanding here of, the Azure documentation is amazing, but please understand where your costs are going to come in. They'll sneak some of those costs in there. And it's not so much the point that it's going to, you can't change it. It's not that Microsoft's trying to dig you for additional costs. I mean, it's one VM. They don't care. But they want you to have a good user experience. Right. So if you spin up a VM, you're kicking the tires in this, and then you spin up a VM and it's the performance is god awful. It's not going to be a good experience. Right. You're going to walk away. So they try to make sure that they put you in there, and make sure that that test drive is looking good. At least that's my thought process. I like to think. More than likely, I'm probably wrong. All right. So here, to see what sizes we have available to us, I can go in this screen. And I'll do an F8. And you can see on the bottom, and I apologize for my font down here, but it just gives us an idea of the different sizes that we have available to us. I got to keep the microphone in front of me. So right here is, I just saw it, standard BS1, somewhere in there. But you get the point. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is we're going to create a VM. I'm going to leave it just the way we had in the docs, except I changed it for my environment. I'm creating in my central US. It's going to be demo 2, and I'm using my own resource group. Why I do this is then I can just delete that resource group, and it cleans everything else up. So we'll hit F8 on this. We have to provide a user, as you can see on the bottom. I'm sorry, my font is small down there. Now, this is going to chug through. As you can see down here, it's doing its thing. It'll come back and it'll tell me whether it was successful or not. More than likely, it should be successful because I've done this more than once. Now, while that's doing its thing, let's go check out what's going on in our portal. Yeah, we don't want to do this. So back at my portal, just to give you an idea of how Azure lays this out, we have our favorites on this side, all right? And it has, if we move this over here, we can have just the icons. So I can check out my resource groups, and I can go into my demo resource group. It shows me everything that's created so far. It already has the demo 2 VM starting to create. All right, so it's not there yet, but it is already showing up in my resource group, which is pretty cool. All right. If I want to look at my SQL databases, we have that action here. If I want to look at just my virtual machines, I can filter on that information. Okay. So right here, my demo 2, it's in the creating status. I have 2 other ones down here that are stopped and they're deallocated. This is not impacting my Azure spend. Here's my storage accounts. This is basically for my Cloud Shell storage, or was created when I started my Cloud Shell storage. Go into my virtual networks, and these are the VNets that I have so far. And then down here is my cost management. I don't like looking at this because when I have to submit expenses, I just don't like doing that. So far this month, I've billed 30 cents. This makes me extremely happy. All right, I've had bills of over $500 because I was doing some courses for Pluralsight that required some high-end types of databases. So as you can see right here, total bill in the last 12 months is almost $800, which most of it was done probably in the last 4 months. All right, so if you look at SQL database managed instances, those are $1,500 a month, give or take. All right, way more than I can look at, but anyway. All right, now one thing while that other VM is spinning up, what I wanted to do is do something fun. So I'm going to go into add. I want to add a resource, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look for WordPress. Now what's cool about this is they have WordPress on Windows and WordPress on Linux. So I'm going to grab WordPress. Now this is going to create a web app. Now if you recall, when we looked at the free services, App Services was one of those always free. Now again, you have to understand that it depends on what level or what tier you set it at. Now, regardless of what tier you set it at, you can always change it. Again, that's the beauty of Azure. Scale up, scale down. So I'm going to click Create. I'm going to call this MJT-WP. Cool. I'm going to use an existing. I'm going to grab my demo resource group because when I'm done here, I can delete everything. We'll leave Azure Database for my, or actually I'm going to do, I think I did something else. No, I'm going to leave Azure Database for MySQL. And it says I already have a couple app services because my last course I had to create several apps, and I'm leaving those out there because if I have to do maintenance, I want to make sure that I have those same resources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this and do a create new. We'll call this WP app service. Now here's the pricing tier. They put us at S1 standard. So I'm going to click on this, and if I can go over, I mean, here's the different pricing and what's option or what our options are. I can see additional options with the additional pricing tiers. Okay, this is all what comes along with it. I don't need any of this. I'm just playing around. So I'm going to go to Dev Test. Oh, here we go. F1. This is my favorite word, free. We'll click F1. We'll click Apply. Now I can create this app and run it for free. Click Create. Say what database settings required. I didn't check that. Again, make sure you check everything on here. Now, this is only if I'm going to be using storage on the database, which it shouldn't do that. Click OK. MySQL location, we'll do Central US. Click Create. And now while that's doing that, let's circle back and look at our VMs, see if our VMs have been created. So let's go to virtual machines. Everything's created and they're running. Here is the confirmation in VS Code that it's running. Now I'm going to pull up a bigger shell environment. Now here's what I wanted to show you. Now these are my test ones. I baked some already just in case these demos didn't work. But here's the demo that I just created, demo 2. It's giving me a standard DS1 V2. Okay, so this is outside of my free Azure runtime. All right, this is out of my 12 months free space. So what I need to do is I need to circle back. And again, these things are all changeable. We can scale these back. So I go to my virtual machine, demo 2. Click on size. My sizes aren't showing up. But essentially in this area, these would populate all the way down, and I would be able to select the appropriate size for this virtual machine. So if I go to demo 1, click on size, I'd be able to select B1S, which is the standard general, which will put me back in my pricing tier. Let's see if demo 2, if that populated yet. Here we go. All right, I'm seeing my price range, but as you can see, they get fairly heavy. I just did this the other day. Anyway.
So Mike, before you get too far ahead of yourself, there was 2 questions. Raymond wanted to know, back when you were setting up the free WordPress app,
yeah,
and you picked the dev test option, that F1, it had a note on there about 60 minutes a day, and he was curious what happens when you cross that 60-minute threshold.
I believe.
Is it like a shutdown? And
I believe it's a shutdown. I have not, basically in the testing that I've done in the courses that I've set up, I've done the free stuff, and I'm trying to think if I hit those after the fact.
And while you're chewing on that, Nate was wondering on the test WordPress free app, it says the test WordPress is a free app, but are you being billed for the database storage? That,
if we look at, you are going to get hit if you have data stored in it. Of course, I mean, because that's kind of, to me, of course, Mike, that's, if there's going to be data on disk, it's going to hit you. But that's when I went into that database and I scaled that way back. And I don't recall exactly what the cost per what it was. I thought it was something minimal, like a couple bucks a month. Let me just check that. That doesn't have it in the SQL databases.
And Jeremy was saying that he thinks you couldn't change your VM because you started as a premium disk and you couldn't go to standard.
Oh, yeah. I thought the free one was premium, though. It was a premium smaller disk.
But, there's something I wanted to mention earlier. I'll save it for the end. But for those of you guys that want to get started with Azure and are really looking to grab the free, you have to use the time that's given to you, because there is 1,000 options. And the only way that you can really learn these options and stay in the free tiers is to play. And the only way to do it is to make sure you're taking advantage of the time that Microsoft gives you up front.
Yeah, I'm looking at this additional. Yeah, I'll look into that to see if that 60 minutes per day compute, what that does. But no, and Mike's exactly right. I mean, this is the stuff that, I have to be in this, I'll go 4 months of being in this and then I'm not in it. And I guess my job description is get the training out, hit the objectives that are required by Microsoft to make sure that this technology is going to be, this course is going to be something that's going to be useful for you folks so you can dive in and play around with it. Now, again, the pay as you go, when you look at what I've had to do, I've had $700, $800 in 12 months. I've been tasked with creating high-end type of services within Azure. The Azure SQL managed instance is crazy high, right? And if you set some of the controls on here, like the auto shutdown, make sure when you exit your VM that you deallocate it. All right, those are going to be such big factors when you're doing this, especially in the 12 months of free that you have. I mean, those are going to be game changers. The problem that a lot of us run into is when are we going to do this, right? That was always my pre-Pluralsight issue, is that when can I do this? I was so filled with everything else that I was doing with my job as teaching. You would be surprised as a teacher, we had very little technical professional development time. It was all administrative professional development type required stuff that we had to do, maintaining our certification stuff. That's why it's really important to take advantage of this time and don't sign up for the free stuff until you know you're going to have that time. I guess that's my recommendation. I had a student ping me on LinkedIn, a former student, and he was talking about that, and I gave him all the resources that I shared with you folks, the free stuff, and I just said don't start it until you have the time to do it. All right, that 12 months is going to go by in a flash, especially for us that have lives outside of IT, which probably isn't a whole lot of us at some times, it feels like. But again, make sure that you use that stuff wisely.
Well, Mike, just to take that point a step farther, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I am past the free stuff, but the first month it's a $200 credit, unlimited for anything, and then it's free services for 12 months, but only in certain tiers, correct?
Yeah, in the portal, yes. So
the reason I'm mentioning that is because don't make the mistake that I did. What I did is I signed up for an account. The minute you sign up for the account and to get started, that timer starts, and that $200 unlimited in the first month is the absolute best month. And I waited 3 months before I even 3 weeks before I even decided to touch the console. So I basically wasted the $200 that I was given to me the first month.
Yeah.
So
yep.
I would say if you are learning, use some of the free things that people are putting in the chat. But if you know you want to go to the Azure Portal and you're going to start an account, don't start that account until you are ready, either that night or the next night, to actually make VMs, because the money goes whether you use it or not.
Yep. Yeah, and like I was saying in the beginning, with some of the resources, I saw somebody posted, use Microsoft Learn before you get started. Absolutely. Get your feet underneath you, get your sea legs underneath you before you start that account. And I would guess a lot of us have started those accounts already, and it sucks. You can create another account, all right? Spin up another Microsoft account. I don't know. I mean, that's certainly something I think you got to tie it to a different phone number though. But again, that's my biggest rule of thumb with, like that student that, pinged me this morning. I said, don't start until you're ready to learn. Get out there, get some of this stuff underneath you. Again, I touch very lightly on the resources here on, resource groups, network, or virtual networks, storage. That's not even, I wouldn't even start there until I got even deeper into that. So you understand exactly where you're going to go, and you can scale everything as needed. I mean, some of it, it's the cost of, it's the cost of your education too. If you have a $15 recurring bill a month, I mean, that's a Netflix charge, right? All right, real quick. Just want to jump out to the WordPress site, and then that'll be pretty much it, I think, for this presentation. Theoretically, this works, if I remember my password. If not, I have one already created. So it goes through the installation of WordPress. So we click Continue. Information, we'll call this demo RTPSUG, username MJ. No.
the ABC is going to fool people for sure.
Yeah, I know.
Very weak.
It's very weak, but I did this just before, and I forgot it. Confirm use. That's part of what I did. Confirm use weak password. They're going to put me on a naughty list. Sure. All right, so it'll do its thing, and it's going to bring you up to a pretty wonky WordPress site. All right, it has some basic themes, and while it's doing its thing, I'll just show you what I did earlier this morning. This is a WordPress theme that I spun up, RTPSG-WP. This is live, and this is one of their basic themes. So my first hello world post. Hi, RTPSUG. Thank you so much for letting me introduce you to the world of Azure and cloud. And again, that's pretty much what I want to wrap up with. I know this WordPress installation is going to take a little bit. I just want to see if I can get this wrapped up. What was my username? MJ? So here's my WordPress site. I can customize my dashboard or customize my site. So it gives you the generic WordPress site. You can change the active theme. The one that I chose was this guy here. Let's do this one. I don't think I applied that. So now this should be my live WordPress site. I'll go back over here. Here's my URL. And there you go. That's a nice little app service that you can throw into your backpack. And again, some of your app services are free, but just something nice to kick the tires and play around with. And just, you know, even if you're doing a proof of concept, this is what you can do. All right. That's all I have. I wanted to thank you folks for letting me come in and play around with you. Special thanks to Mike for inviting me. And I hope this was helpful, at least a little bit. I hope you could take a couple things back and at least keep your Azure spend down and find some of those free resources. And again, let's document some of those questions that I wasn't able to answer. And that's pretty much all I have.